good. I like that. I like playing with C. I like playing.
Thank God.
Shut up, dude.
You know, we let one mistake balloon into two, and that's probably the area we need to grow in the most. But overall, I would say it's pretty similar to what I expected from the film.
You know, and it's heartbreaking, you know, for the tribe, and it's heartbreaking for this area.
The Indiana Fever's post-game press conference following their recent win did not produce the headlines the internet had been anticipating. Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham walked into that room, answered questions with the kind of directness rarely seen at that level of public scrutiny, and left the press corps with considerably less material than it had hoped for. The exchange lasted long enough to make two things clear. The players were not interested in performing drama for an audience, and the locker room narrative that had circulated online for weeks bore little resemblance to what was actually happening inside the franchise. That gap between external perception and internal reality has become one of the defining features of the 2026 Indiana Fever season. The team operates under conditions of near-constant media amplification, where every sideline exchange, every substitution decision, every timeout interaction is treated as potential evidence for a pre-written story. The story in this case was division, dysfunction, a roster at war with itself. The press conference, as it turned out, was not a confirmation of that story. It was a rebuttal. Clark's responses during the session drew significant attention from viewers who followed the footage online. The comment sections reflected a consistent observation. Her basketball IQ translated directly into the way she communicated. She did not speak in generalities. She referenced specific defensive assignments, described in concrete terms how the team had executed out of particular timeouts, and broke down individual possessions with a precision that most broadcast analysts would struggle to match. For viewers who follow the Fever closely, this was not surprising. For those encountering her at that level of detail for the first time, it registered as something closer to a revelation. Cunningham's contributions to the session were noted with equal appreciation. Her demeanor, direct, composed, occasionally dry, provided a counterbalance that kept the tone grounded. The two players handled the more provocative questions as a unit, not deflecting but redirecting, pulling the conversation back toward what had actually occurred on the floor, rather than what had been speculated about in comment threads and fan forums. The question that prompted the most notable response concerned a reported sideline altercation. When the reporter raised it, the reaction from Clark was immediate and unambiguous: confusion. Not performed confusion, not strategic confusion, but the kind of visible puzzlement that comes from being asked about something you have no memory of because it did not happen the way it was described. She looked at Cunningham. Cunningham looked at her. There was a brief exchange that the cameras caught, not of tension but of mutual recognition that the question was based on something neither of them recognized as accurate. Clark's answer pointed the conversation back to the scoreboard. The Fever were on a 3-game winning streak at that point. They had held leads and defended them. They had closed out games in the fourth quarter, which earlier in the season had been a documented area of inconsistency. Whatever was being read into sideline body language, the results on the court were telling a different story, and Clark made that argument without embellishment. Viewers who followed the comment section discussion noted another element of the press conference that generated considerable engagement: the lighter moments. Clark, whose competitive intensity is well documented, also showed a comfort level with humor during the session that stood in contrast to the tension that the pre-press conference narrative had promised. One exchange in particular, described in multiple comments as Clark goofing around during a question about team communication, landed well with viewers who had been bracing for something more combustible. The relief was palpable in how people responded. They had tuned in expecting evidence of a fracture, and watched two professional athletes be funny with each other instead. That tonal range, the ability to shift from technical analysis to levity without losing credibility, is something viewers explicitly flagged as a marker of leadership. Several comments described Clark's conduct during the session as an example of why she is suited to carry a franchise beyond her on-court production. She read the room. She knew when to be precise and when to release the pressure. That is not a skill that develops overnight, and at her stage of professional development, it is ahead of schedule. The coaching dimension of the press conference drew a different kind of commentary. Stephanie White was present for portions of the session, and viewer reaction to her engagement level was skeptical. The observations were pointed. White appeared disengaged, her body language described as passive, her contributions to the conversation minimal relative to the moment. This was not a new criticism. The comment sections surrounding Fever coverage have returned to White's sideline presence and in-game decision-making repeatedly throughout the season, and the press conference footage gave that ongoing discussion fresh material. One viewer comment, circulated widely enough to reflect a broader sentiment, suggested that Clark should handle both responsibilities, playing and coaching. The humor in that framing was obvious, but the frustration underneath it was real. The Fever's fan base has watched an extraordinarily talented roster navigate a season that has not always felt fully managed from the bench. The perception that the players are operating at a higher level of clarity than the coaching staff is directing is one that the comment section has returned to consistently, and the press conference did nothing to dispel it. The free throw discrepancy was another point of discussion. Clark's attempts from the charity stripe during the recent stretch of games have been below what her offensive aggression would typically generate. Viewers noticed the question of whether the coaching staff is deploying her in situations that maximize her full offensive toolkit, including drawing contact, came up in multiple comment threads. It is the kind of tactical observation that a deeply engaged fanbase produces, and the Fever's viewers are among the most analytically attentive in the league. When they see a pattern in the statistics, they flag it. The fact that Clark herself did not address it directly at the press conference only amplified the curiosity. Away from the press room, the operational realities of this Fever season have been more demanding than the locker room drama narrative suggests. The team has navigated a stretch of road games that presented logistical challenges well beyond the scope of what casual observation would detect. Travel to certain markets involves security protocols that become more elaborate as the team's profile grows. Accommodation arrangements, facility access, and even something as routine as meal logistics after late-night games have required coordination that most fans do not see, and most media coverage does not report. The players and staff have referenced these realities in passing during various interviews throughout the season, and those references deserve more attention than they typically receive. The broader context matters. The Indiana Fever are operating as one of the most scrutinized franchises in professional basketball, men's or women's, at a moment when the resources and infrastructure surrounding the team are still in the process of catching up to the level of attention the team generates. That mismatch creates friction. It is not the kind of friction that produces locker room blow-ups or public feuds. It is the slow, grinding kind of friction that comes from performing at a high level while the support structure around you is still being built. The players understand this. They have said as much. The question is whether the organization is moving fast enough to close the gap. On the court, the chemistry that the rumor cycle spent weeks claiming was absent has been visible in the structure of how the Fever play. The team does not run through a single option. Clark is the primary engine, but the offense functions because other players are prepared to step into scoring and decision-making roles when she is being crowded. That distribution of responsibility is not accidental. It reflects preparation and trust. When Clark is being doubled on a drive, the kickout goes to a player who has been in that spot before and knows what to do with it. That kind of situational confidence does not exist in a locker room that is fractured. The defensive end tells a similar story. The Fever's defensive communication, the calls, the rotations, the help side positioning, requires players to be responsive to each other in real time. A team that is not talking, not trusting, not operating as a unit cannot execute that kind of coordination at the level the Fever have demonstrated during their recent winning run. The scoreboard, as Clark noted, is the most reliable document available. The transition moments, the possessions immediately following turnovers, the defensive sets coming out of opposing timeouts, are where the team's internal cohesion becomes most visible. During the stretch of games preceding the press conference, the Fever had responded to several potentially damaging runs by opponents with organized, disciplined resistance. They did not allow single mistakes to cascade. A turnover stayed a turnover. A missed assignment stayed a missed assignment. The team's ability to contain errors rather than compound them is a sign of a group that is communicating and correcting in real time rather than pointing fingers between possessions. That capacity for error correction is also something that shows up in how the coaching staff interacts with the players during stoppages. The adjustments made during timeouts in the recent game stretch focused on execution specifics, spacing on the weak side, screen angles, defensive rotation timing. The content of those adjustments, as players have described them in interviews, reflects a staff that is preparing the team for what they are about to face rather than reacting to what just went wrong. Whether that preparation is translating to the level the fan base expects is a separate question, and it is a legitimate one. But it is not the same question as whether the locker room is functional. Clark's value to this franchise extends beyond the statistical categories her name appears in each box score. Her presence has changed the competitive calculation every opponent makes when they prepare for Indiana. Teams that are preparing for the Fever are preparing for her specifically, which creates space for every other player on the roster. That space is only valuable if the players around her are prepared to use it, and the early evidence of this season suggests they are developing the capacity to do exactly that. Aaliyah Boston's positioning when Clark draws double coverage has improved. The players spacing the floor on the weak side are making faster decisions. The ball is moving with more purpose. That development is not incidental. It is the result of work, of repetition, of a shared understanding of what the offense is trying to accomplish. You do not get that kind of coordinated improvement from a team in disarray. You get it from a team that is practicing together, communicating together, and holding each other accountable in the ways that do not make television. The press conference moment that perhaps best illustrated the state of this team came when Clark was asked, in a phrasing that was clearly designed to elicit something provocative, whether she felt supported by the people around her. The answer was direct and unequivocal. She did. She named specific teammates and described specific ways in which they had shown up during games, not in abstract terms, not with the diplomatic vagueness that press conference answers often settle into, but with actual examples drawn from actual possessions. That specificity is telling. It is the kind of answer that is difficult to manufacture under pressure. Cunningham's contribution to that portion of the exchange was equally unambiguous. She did not hedge. She did not soften the response with the careful qualifications that athletes sometimes use when navigating sensitive questions. She was direct about what the team was doing well, direct about where work remained, and direct about the fact that the team's internal assessment of itself did not match the external narrative that had been circulating. That kind of confidence in front of a press room full of cameras is not something a player produces if the environment behind the scenes is as turbulent as the rumors suggested. The viewer response to that exchange reflects an audience that is capable of distinguishing between substance and spectacle. The comments that praised Clark's and Cunningham's conduct at the press conference were not generic expressions of fan loyalty. They were specific observations about communication style, about leadership under pressure, about the difference between athletes who understand their platform and athletes who are overwhelmed by it. The Fever's core players, whatever challenges surround them, appear to understand their platform clearly. The season continues. The questions about coaching decision-making, about free throw opportunities, about the organizational infrastructure required to support a franchise operating at this level of visibility, none of those questions have been resolved by a single press conference. They persist, and they will continue to generate discussion in comment sections and coverage alike. The fan base is paying close attention, and their attention is precise enough to notice when the details do not add up. What the press conference did resolve, at least for viewers who watched it carefully, was the premise of the locker room division story. That story required a team that was not talking, not trusting, and not playing for each other. What the cameras captured was something else entirely. Two players who clearly know each other well, who speak about their teammates with specificity and warmth, and who find each other genuinely funny. That is not a locker room in crisis. That is a locker room doing its job. The broader challenge for this franchise is to ensure that what happens in that locker room is supported by the decisions made above it. The players have demonstrated, repeatedly and in public, that they are prepared to compete at the highest level and to carry themselves with the professionalism the moment requires. The organizational and coaching infrastructure needs to meet them there. The fan base has been clear about that expectation for some time. If the comment sections are any measure, patience is not unlimited, but for now, the Fever are winning. Clark is playing at a level that forces every opponent to make uncomfortable strategic choices. Cunningham and the rest of the supporting cast are developing the capacity to punish those choices when they are made. The team is communicating in the ways that matter, and the internet's 3-part documentary about a locker room implosion is going to have to wait.